My name's Tom Casey. I work for the Fresno County Ag Department. We have a district office right over here in Firebaugh, gentlemen and ladies. If you ever have any questions, you can always stop in there. Most of you guys come by each year for the permits, and we issue you your restricted materials permits. We're there 5 days a week. We don't usually do weekends, we do occasionally. And of course, we don't do many holidays, but occasionally we do the holidays. There at the Firebaugh District Office, we do a lot of pesticide work because we do have a lot of pesticide issues and a lot of growers using a lot of pesticides. So about 50% of our time is spent on pesticides. The other 50% we spend on what we call phytos, or phytosanitary certificates. That's exporting stuff, guys, to other countries. We're exporting your almonds to Saudi Arabia, the European Union countries, China, Japan, Mexico. Basically here in Fresno County, oh my, I think we're going to 93 different countries with some ungodly thing like 126 different products. So we do a lot of export. So my focus today was going to be on the Chlorpyrifos. Some of my background, I guess. I'm a Fresno State graduate. Ag business, long time ago. Of course, I did the 4-H and FFA thing, so I basically raised sheep, cattle, pigs, horses, goats, chickens, rabbits. That was exciting. I did that for about 10 years. Then I moved up here to go to Fresno State, where I got involved in the turf industry. I worked at golf courses on a maintenance crew, put myself through college, and then after I got done, they offered me a job, and I kind of stayed for a while. So I did about 20 years in the turf industry. I worked at Sunnyside Country Club and Belmont Country Club on the maintenance staff out there. And then I moved to the Fresno County here. I've been with the county for about 16, 17 years. So basically my talk today was on the Chlorpyrifos conditions here. As I stated, they are on your permit, and the DPR now is starting to look at a lot of the insecticides and the field fumigants a little closer, and they're actually making more restrictions on the growers. Several years ago, we dealt with a lot of field fumigation materials. We're now kind of moving into the insecticides, the contacts. For the Fresno County permit conditions, if you are using the Chlorpyrifos on your alfalfa fields, of course, guys, they also use the Loris Banner Chlorpyrifos on almonds and cotton. Basically, one of the first things that we kind of needed to talk about if you're going to do the Chlorpyrifos applications are bee checks. If that's why I kind of handed you the label here, kind of down at the bottom there, it says that this product is highly toxic to bees, guys. So the first thing that has to happen is once you've decided to apply Chlorpyrifos, you need to check with the Fresno County and do a bee check. What that is to look for beekeepers that are within a mile of your site that you're planning to use the material on. And what it does is it gives the beekeeper 48 hours to move his hives. Or I don't see a lot of guys moving their hives. I do see a lot of guys throwing a tarp over them. That seems to do a pretty good job of preventing the bees from off-site movement of the materials. So a lot of the guys out here are physically tarping their hives in order to prevent the bee kill situation. So kind of one of the first things is to do the bee check. Of course, before you can even purchase or do anything with the Chlorpyrifos, you're going to have a restricted material permit. which you can get from me here at the Firebaugh office, or you can go to any other district offices here in Fresno County, or the main office over there off of Maple. So first thing you're going to need to do is put the Chlorpyrifos on your permit. Then you're going to need to put the Chlorpyrifos on each site that you'd like to use it on. The next thing that's going to kind of come along is usually a PCA is going to write you a recommendation and then do a notice of intent. The Chlorpyrifos is restricted material, so a notice of intent is required. And some of it's in the county permit conditions is kind of discussing what needs to be on that notice of intent. And what I'm getting to, guys, is with the Chlorpyrifos, what they're doing is, if you kind of look at the front page label here, right under the active ingredients, it tells you contains 3.755 pounds of Chlorpyrifos per gallon. And that was the reason why I kind of gave you the front page. It's kind of right in here, guys. It's just giving you the amount of Chlorpyrifos, active ingredient, in the product. We need that information because what we're doing is we're taking that amount and we're doing a mathematical equation, and what we're trying to do is determine a setback distance. They use setback. I certainly wish they would have used buffer zone. That's normally our standard terminology is buffer zone, meaning keep people out of this area. But they've used the term setback. So setback and buffer zone are the same terminology. So basically what we're doing is we're looking at the product, we're determining what the buffer zone or setback distance is. So with the alfalfa growers, when you look on your labels for the rate of alfalfa, the top end rate is usually 2 pints. And normally that's what I see you guys applying is 2 pints per acre. Well, when you kind of do the 2 pints per acre, like I say, they're kind of on the second page, it gives you the mathematical breakdown of actually how to do it. And basically what it boils down to is you're putting on 0.939 pounds of active ingredient per acre. With that information, you can get the setback distance. Of course, the setback distance is on the third page, where if you are making an aerial application, your setback distance is going to be 250 feet. If you are making a ground rig application, then your setback distance will be 150 feet. And now what am I talking about? What am I talking about is for each of your fields, when you're using this product, what we're looking for is what they call sensitive sites. A sensitive site is where people are located. So basically houses. If you kind of look at the very front of this thing, I hate to kind of bounce back and forth, but it's kind of the easiest way to explain this. I don't like to just sit here and read this stuff. Anyway, basically the sensitive sites are homes. So you guys kind of need to look at your farming operations and see if you have neighbors' houses or residences around your fields. If you have residences around your fields, you need to see if they're going to fall into this 250-foot setback or buffer zone. What the deal is we're not allowing you to make the application in these areas. So if you have a 100-acre field and there's a home over here on this side, we're not going to allow you to spray the 250 feet if you're doing it aerial, or the 150 if you're doing it with the ground rig of that side of the field that's by the house. The PCAs at this point are starting to recommend different products for those areas. There are some alternatives that they can switch to. The Chlorpyrifos has been a mainstay for the ag industry for a long time, so it's a little bit difficult to move from this product to other products. But when you have a situation where you have a residence next to your fields, there's going to be a buffer zone where you're not going to be allowed to spray. So you need to be aware of this. You need to be aware of this as you're purchasing other farming locations. You guys are going to need to be aware of housing tracts, and another one is the schools, guys. They've kind of come up with some new rules that if you're within a quarter mile of a school, you're going to need to do some notifications. Here in the Firebaugh area, we only have about 6 or 7 growers that are around Mendota School, Firebaugh School, so none of you guys actually fall into that area. So once we've determined the setback distance, which like I say is the buffer zone, when you turn in the notice of intent, it needs to have a map of the sensitive sites that are around you. And it also needs to have on there the setback or buffer zone distance. So that's kind of a new requirement for the PCAs. I've been receiving NOIs, and I simply call up the PCA and tell him that they need to include this information on the NOIs. I'm in the process of kind of trying to inform the PCAs and educate the PCAs so that they're filling out the NOIs correctly. So, I think we're about 50% there, guys, of getting everybody on board with this. I actually have a little more problem with the almond growers. The reason being, when the almond guys are using chlorpyrifos, they're normally going in with 4 pint per acre. So it makes their buffer zone or setback distance larger. So anyway, with the alfalfa guys, so far, I don't think I've really run into any problems where I'm finding homes around alfalfa fields. I know there are some locations where this occurs though, so I just haven't seen the NOIs come in, or maybe they're not using the product yet. We're a little early, guys, for chlorpyrifos. So after you've done the NOI for this product, there is no posting for the corners. That's always a question they ask me, is do I need to do posting? There is no posting requirement for this one. If you're having the application done by a pest control business, then the pest control business needs to give you a notice of completion after they finish the job. And then, of course, they need to use the use reporting. So the use reporting is another area of concern for the ag department. We're now doing a lot of computerized use reporting, and they're able to track it a lot better, guys, than the old handwritten days where we wrote everything down. The amount of material that you guys are purchasing is not the same amount as that you're applying. So sometimes when you look at the statistics, I noticed Lynn was using some statistics up there. Some of them may be slightly skewed, and it's in regards to individuals not submitting use reports. So the Ag Commissioner's pretty proactive about trying to get guys to turn in the use reports. So anyway, make sure you guys are turning in your use reports. Basically, that's kind of it for the chlorpyrifos. Like I say, they are using the chlorpyrifos on cotton and almonds. The other thing, of course, chlorpyrifos is an organophosphate, which is going to require cholinesterase testing if you're using it on a regular basis. What is a regular basis? 6 times during a 30-day period. And it doesn't matter how long you're using it, even if you just touch it for 2 minutes, maybe you're the mixer loader, that's considered 1 day. So if you have 6 days of use within a 30-day period, then you're required to do the cholinesterase testing. Of course, at the very beginning, you have to do the baseline testing to give the doctor a baseline in order to judge the cholinesterase testing. So a lot of the aerial companies, because they're using a lot of these products, their employees are doing this type of thing. So the other thing that I was going to talk about today was just a couple of the, I call them the 4 or 5 areas when the inspectors are out doing inspections on you guys. The inspector is driving along, he looks over and he sees a guy spraying some alfalfa. He's supposed to pull over, find out what the guy's doing, and kind of look around. The areas where I'm seeing problems with the growers, so when we come out and we do an inspection on you, these are the things that we're finding most of the time that you guys are having trouble with, or that you don't have maybe. The first thing that you guys usually, the inspection is asking for is the label. The tractor driver has to have the label with him when he's on the tractor, unless the mixed load site is within 1/4 mile. But because our fields are so large out here, guys, most of the time your mixed load is more than 1/4 mile away. So if your mixed loading site and your pump are more than 1/4 mile away, your tractor driver needs to have the labels with him on the tractor. That's what we're finding most of the time. We pull up on the tractor driver, he doesn't have the label. We ask him where the mixed load site is, and he tells us, you know, it's a mile down that dirt road, because everything here in Firebaugh is a mile down the dirt road. Take a left at the ditch. So we are allowed to pull up the labels electronically. If your tractor driver could pull up the label on his iPhone, that's acceptable. But the first thing we always ask the guy is, where's the label? And what we're trying to determine is what the guy's spraying. So the first thing that I usually find is that the guy doesn't have a label. The next issue that we run into is proper PPE. PPE, which is personal protective equipment, comes right off of the label. On these labels, it tells you what the applicator or the mixed loader is supposed to be wearing. So mainly if you have to read the label and make sure that the applicator has what they're supposed to be wearing. There are also regulations that require applicators to have particular PPE, basically gloves and glasses. Gloves and glasses are going to be required if the applicator is making a hand application, usually with a backpack sprayer or some type of wand. They need to have gloves and glasses per regulation. The other place that they need gloves and glasses per regulation is when they're on the spray rig. But actually most of it, you guys are exempt. The reason being, when the applicator is on the spray rig, if he is spraying down and the boom is below him and directed downward, then the requirement to have gloves and glasses on is not there, because there's an exemption because you're spraying below and spraying downward. Of course, this doesn't work with air blasters. This is only for your boom rigs. You still have to have the gloves and glasses immediately available, and that's why here at the Ag Department we recommend some kind of a safety bucket or a duffel bag that basically has gloves, glasses, eye wash, coveralls, soap, single-use towels. Inside the container, I see a lot of guys put the emergency medical care posting on these containers. So we recommend that you have a safety container or duffel bag. It does have to be sealable. When the individual is not wearing the gloves and the glasses, they do have to be in a sealed container. Duffel bag zipper is going to be good enough. You're just trying to keep the pesticide material off of the gloves and glasses. So, PPE. When I come up and I'm doing an inspection on a people, most of the time it's the gloves and glasses. The guy either has forgotten the glasses back at his truck, or he lost his gloves, whatever the case may be. So it's usually gloves and glasses where I'm running into problems. Most of the time, if there's a respirator requirement, most of the time the guys have the respirator. So usually gloves and glasses. The next thing that I run into the biggest problem with is emergency medical posting. What this requirement is that if your employee gets sick or injured, they're supposed to be taken to some kind of medical facility. This information has to be posted. Most of the applicators have this posted on their tractor. If they have the glass, they usually put it on the glass. What is on the emergency medical posting? The name of the doctor, the address of the doctor, the phone number of the doctor. The other requirement of the owner or the grower is to contact a doctor prior to any emergencies and set up that your employees can come and visit the facility. It's basically so that the doctor will approve your insurance so that your employees can come to his facility. So part of the emergency medical plan is to have the doctor set up before any accidents occur. The other part of it is to have the information posted where people can see it. The next one that I run into, and it's actually because it became a new regulation, is what we call decontamination. What I'm talking about is water to wash yourself off with if you get exposed to a pesticide. This year, starting January 1st, the requirement changed a little bit. What I'm talking about is that at the beginning of the day, each applicator needs to have 3 gallons of water in order to wash off with. Again, the quarter mile. If the mixed load facility is within a quarter mile, he doesn't need the 3 gallons. But again, here we are in Firebaugh. Everybody's mixed load place is more than a quarter mile away. So basically, the applicators need to carry a jug of 3 gallons of water. The 3 gallons has to be, of course, clean water, no algae, and it has to be 3 gallons at the beginning of the workday. The guy may use some. If my inspector or myself come up on it to an individual at say 10 o'clock and maybe he's only got 2 gallons of water and he says, well, I've already washed my hands a couple of times. That's okay. They have to have 3 gallons of water at the beginning of the day. The other thing that comes into the decontamination is eye wash. When you look on the label, if the label says that safety glasses are required, because you are producing an agriculture product, you need to have eye wash 16 ounces immediately available. Immediately available means it needs to be on the tractor. So the other place where I see problems with the decontamination facility is, one, because it's kind of it is a new regulation that we are enforcing. The applicator needs 3 gallons of water at the beginning of the day, and he also needs 16 ounces of eye wash water. So if you were to look at the very beginning of the day, you need 3 gallons and 16 ounces of water for each applicator. And it's basically not having the 3 gallons of water. The other thing that we're looking at, when we come up and we look at the tractor driver, and let's say most of the tractor drivers that I'm finding right now don't have the 3 gallons of water, guys. They don't have a container on their vehicle. So the grower is responsible. The grower, the owner, the property operator has to provide the 3 gallon container or 5 gallon container. 3 gallons or more. So what I'm seeing now, because it's kind of a new regulation, is nobody has any of the containers. What I'd like to see is at least the containers, whether they're full or not. That's your part, guys. You have to provide the container. You also have to make sure that the employees fill the containers in the morning before they go out. So right now, about 50% of the growers I come up on have the containers, have the 3 gallons, have the eye wash, everything's okay. The other guys, I believe, haven't heard of this regulation, so basically we're violating them for no decontamination, and then we have to make sure that an appropriate container is delivered to the application area before we can allow the application to continue. So in today's world, about a year and a half ago, we switched to computerized inspections. For an extremely long time, we did the inspections on a handwritten form. Now the inspectors are showing up with an iPad. What does this mean for the grower? What this means is that the DPR has instant access to what we see out there in the field. And do they respond to what we see? And so what I'm kind of getting to is, before, when we would come up on an application with the handwritten one, we were allowed a little bit of leniency, and they called it inspector's discretion. And what it was if an inspector pulled up onto an application and maybe there was something missing, but in the inspector's opinion, it wasn't a health hazard or some other environmental hazard, he could allow the application to continue. We're not allowed that anymore. If we pull up onto your application and they don't have the label or the proper PPE or the emergency medical posting or the decontamination facility, then we need to stop the application until those materials can be brought to the applicator. So what I'm trying to get to, guys, is if one of my inspectors comes up and does an inspection on you and he finds that you don't have one item or another, we're going to call the supervisor, and it's usually whoever the tractor driver. We ask the tractor driver, who's your supervisor? And then normally they contact the supervisor. At that point, we ask the supervisor to bring whatever is lacking, whether it's gloves, glasses, water. At that point in time, we stop the application until the gloves, glasses, water is brought to the application site. It doesn't have to be the owner that brings the gloves or glasses. It doesn't have to be the PCA. It doesn't have to be anybody, just something. It could be your mechanic. It could be anybody. But basically, we're going to stop the applications until the proper equipment is at the location. And so I just kind of need to make the growers aware, because we're getting a little more technical on what we're requiring you guys to have, and then we're demanding that you have it. One of the other responsibilities of the grower is what they call disciplinary action plan. You guys do it all the time. You may not have a terminology for it. And what I'm talking about is, if somebody breaks a rule, if you don't show up for work 3 times, we fire you. Okay? How about the pesticide world? If I drive up on you, whether it's an inspector or the owner or the supervisor, if I catch you not wearing your rubber gloves 3 times, we're going to demote you down to thinner or ditch digger or whatever your disciplinary action is. So the owners are actually responsible to have some kind of a disciplinary action plan in place. Like I say, we kind of do it naturally. I'm sure you guys have rules that you enforce on your employees. Here in the pesticide world, for these label requirements and PPE requirements and decontamination requirements, the owner, you guys, are responsible to provide this stuff to the employees. You are also assuring that you are going to provide it. If you provide it and the employee doesn't use it, let's say, because a lot of times I drive up on a guy and he's left his gloves in his truck or something. So the owner was providing the equipment, the employee simply didn't, or forgot it or broke it or whatever. In that case, we're able to look at the grower in a little better light, meaning we may not have to fine you for the violation because you did provide it. The guy simply forgot it. And then when I talk to the supervisor, hopefully he'll say something to me like, yeah, if he forgets his glasses again, I'm going to have him on a weed eater for the next 2 days or some kind of a penalty or some kind of something for not having the correct equipment. So it's pretty important, guys, that if you receive a call or your supervisors receive a call and we need something at the field, we're basically holding your application up until we get whatever we're asking for. So I haven't had any problems. Every grower that I've contacted or supervisor, and I call him up and I tell him, hey, I'm out here and your guy doesn't have any decontamination. I either get, okay, Tom, I'm on the farm, I got a bucket, I don't know what happened, I'm heading your way. Or I get, Tom, I'm over here in Carmel, sitting along the beach. Don't think I'm gonna bring you any water, Tom. And I tell him, that's fine. Is there somebody you can contact in your organization that can bring me water? Because I'm gonna have to stop your application until we get the water. So the 2 cases I normally get are the guy immediately brings it. You guys are really responsive to most all of the ag department's requests. I have to thank you, and we really appreciate it. And the other one I get is I'm in Carmel, or I'm not able to do it, or maybe I'm just heading to Fresno to buy some more stuff. So at that point, you need to kind of think a little bit and say, well, why don't you call this guy? He's in the shop. The rubber gloves or the glasses are right there in the shop, and they can bring them to you. So it doesn't have to be the owner or anybody to bring us this stuff, but we're going to require that we have whatever it is before we allow the application to continue. Of course, the Ag Commissioner always wanted me to express that we are still going to violate you on that situation. Like I say, the whole idea, guys, here is to educate you. Hopefully you have the proper stuff. If you don't have the proper stuff, then we do a violation on you. We are now sending out the inspection forms through the email. So if on your permit I don't have your email address, a lot of times I'll just mail it through the normal mail. If you have violations, they've always been tracking you guys as far as how many violations does Grower A have here. With the new CalPete's computerized system setup, which they are using all over the state of California, all of the ag departments are using it, it tracks you. So when I come up on you and I type in the name of your permit, it tells me how many times you've been inspected, and it tells me how many violations you have. So the information now is immediately readily available of who you are, what you've done in the past. Before it was a little more difficult. If I wanted to research a farmer, I kind of had to go through a lot of handwritten records and do a lot of searching to figure out how many times is this guy, every time I pull up on this guy, he never has glasses. Well, how many times is that? I'd have to go, and it was real time consuming, and we really didn't do much of it. We tried before to put our efforts into educating the growers. Like I say, now the computerized system, it does the tracking for us. Basically, it kind of boils down to, guys, we're not going to let you sit there and have violations all the time and not do anything to you. We are going to fine you for those. And the more violations that you have, over a 2-year period, I will tell you this, the cycle is normally on a 2-year cycle. So it's the number of violations a grower gets in 2 years, whether the Ag Commissioner determines to fine him or not. When we have a violation, we have a couple of different ways of handling it. We can send what they call a warning letter and say, hey, we were out there, we did an inspection, you didn't have glasses, don't do that again. Next time we catch you, we may fine you. Warning letter. With the warning letters, the Ag Department is required to send a report to the DPR. It's called a decision report. It's why we're not fining Farmer A. Farmer A had a violation. We determined that Farmer A was a good grower or didn't have a bad history with the department. The Farmer A did everything he could to provide the material. Maybe in this case, the employee just forgot it. So we don't believe we need to fine him. But if you do have a number of violations within a 2-year period, the DPR is kind of expecting us to fine you. If we always pull up on you and you never have glasses, we're not going to be able to just send you warning letters, guys. Mainly with the growers here in the Firebaugh district, I don't have a lot of this occurring, guys. Most of the time when I'm coming up to my growers and finding issues, it's usually something that they weren't aware of. Like I say, the biggest one is the decontamination, the 3 gallon. Nobody's got 3 gallons of water out there, guys. About half of you guys now. But most of the guys are real responsive, and we really don't have a big issue with repeat offenders on the same violation. I may catch you one time with no label, but then from then on, the guy's always got the label. But the next time, maybe he doesn't have glasses. So they do kind of take into account whether these are environmental or human effects or paperwork violations. What's a paperwork violation? The use reports, guys. And actually, that's the one that we fine the most. It's a $50 fine. if you don't turn in your use reports, usually is what we start out with. There is a fine rate there, $50 being the lowest. Our ag commissioner has normally used just the lowest amount. Now, on that, there is kind of a little twist. If we have repeat offenders that continually don't turn in use reports, we basically have the authority to suspend or revoke your restricted materials permit, which kind of makes it difficult for a person to buy chemicals, actually impossible. In those situations, what we're doing is we'll issue you a 3-month permit, and then before we issue you another permit, we want to see the use reports for the past 3 months. We verify everything. We no longer take your word for it. Basically, we kind of put you on the bad pile there. And we've only had a very few people in Fresno County who've actually been on that route, guys. But there are people that simply refuse to abide by some of the rules and regulations. Out here in Firebaugh, I've never had anybody even get anywhere near that. Now, it doesn't mean that all of the use reports are in, but most of the time, if I call a guy up and say, hey, you missed a couple of months here, or they receive a letter from the main office that says, hey, you owe us a couple of months, most of the growers out here are real responsive, so I haven't had to do anything like that. But it is one of the deals. And like I say, the ag commissioner is extremely concerned about getting the use reports in. So that's one of the things that we really look at. I'll just go over a couple of quick topics, because that was basically what I wanted to talk about, was the Chlorpyrifos conditions, and then some of the problems that I'm seeing out there when I do inspections. Just real quickly, I'm not sure if you guys have cotton. Transform, sulfoxaflor is the active ingredient, has been registered again for the cotton. So if you guys have cotton and you're having some trouble with ligas last year, a lot of the guys were using the Transform. So again, the Transform is toxic to bees, and the bee check is vital for the Transform. Kind of another little side deal was the new regulations on the schools, and I already spoke about it just a minute ago. And what it's in regards to is if your field is within a quarter mile of a school or registered daycare, you have to notify the school or the registered daycare of the materials that you plan on using on that field. Guys, when you're purchasing land, look where the schools are at. Stay away from schools, guys. I believe the school requirements are going to get more stringent as time goes on. We've always had permit conditions about spraying around schools. Basically, our permit condition says don't spray around schools when the kids are there. Seems very reasonable. They're getting a little more stringent around schools, guys. So before you're leasing or purchasing property, you're going to want to need to look around your environment, guys. You're looking for residences and you're looking for schools. So all of the growers this year have turned in their pesticide lists to the school and the registered daycare facilities. The ag department, if you get in that situation, will assist you. I get the guy's password. If they're unable to do it at all, I get on the computer and do it one time. It's not a big deal. I simply do a use report query. It picks up all the material that you used the past 2 years. I ask the grower, are this the stuff you're going to use this year? They usually say, yep. And then I shoot it to the schools. So school notification is another new topic that kind of came up this year. And then another one, and it was actually last year, guys, and it was the field workers. We've come up with some new requirements for field workers. Basically, for the grower standpoint, it's in regards to training. It used to be for field workers, you only had to train them every 5 years. Now field workers, just like applicators, need to be trained annually. The other thing I wanted to bring up about the field workers is what I call human exposure. We cannot spray people anymore, guys. If you spray people, I am going to take you to court, okay? It's really getting serious with the field workers out there and the applicators spraying the field workers. When I do an investigation, I do sampling. I may sample their clothing. I may sample the windows, their cars. I can sample anything, guys. We can also use the testimony of field workers, guys. If I have 2 field workers that say you sprayed them, you sprayed them. It's not quite that cut and dry, but it's pretty cut and dry.
You test them?
Just their testimony. Normally, when I have a field worker exposure, the first thing I do is I try to find out how many field workers are involved. Well, of course, I try to find out what was sprayed on them in case it's something toxic. Then I call the fire department and we hose them off. Requirement by law. Once I figured out what the product is, then I try to figure out how many people are involved. Let's say there's 10, just for a number. Then what I do is I go interview each person. What did you see? What did you feel? Did you feel the material hit your hand? Did you feel it hit your face? Did you see it drift on your clothing? Can I have your clothing for sampling? If I take your clothing, you're not going to get it back because they cut it all up. But we can do sampling on the clothing. There's simple testimony of I'm standing in a field, I'm 10 feet from the edge of the field hoeing weeds, and the applicator right across the way was making a application of I don't know what, and the wind was blowing in my direction. And when the applicator came by, he saw us, he saw us, and he still continued. And then I felt the material on my skin, or I saw it drift on the workers in front of me. If they say they saw it, they saw it. If they say they felt it, they felt it. If they say they smelt it, they smelled it. So their testimony of I was sprayed with a pesticide is now considered evidence. It's always been evidence. And so if I can get 2 of them to say that they were sprayed or that they saw the material come on to them, then we may be in court, gentlemen.
What's the time frame from the report that? Immediately, 24 to 48?
Okay. Normally on any pesticide exposures or even drifts, the sooner the ag department hears about it, I hate to say it like this, the sooner we hear about it, the easier it is for us to collect evidence. So, when do I hear about it? Okay, that's actually a good question. How do I hear about it? One way I hear about it is an anonymous phone call. It's one of the field workers that just got fired calls me up and says, I was working in a field yesterday. Now it's on, I go take his statement. So I get anonymous phone calls and they report pesticide drift. Now, whether it's drifted on a human or maybe drifted on another crop, we get anonymous phone calls. We're required by law that when I get an anonymous phone call that says I've been drifted on, I have to do an investigation, or the ag department is required to do an investigation. So we hear about it through anonymous phone calls. Sometimes the person gives us their name, most of the time not. The other way we hear about it is if an individual is poisoned with, or believes they have been exposed to a pesticide, and they go to a doctor. And when they show up to the doctor or healthcare physician, maybe not a doctor, as soon as the doctor or healthcare physician hears that there is a pesticide exposure, the doctor is required by law to report it to the health department. The health department is required by law to report to the ag department. So the other way I hear about exposures is through when somebody goes to a doctor. When they go to the doctor, normally the doctor asks them, what kind of work are you in? You know, after he's asked them what their symptoms are. Well, I'm nauseous, I got a stomach ache, and I got a headache. Kind of sounds like Bud Light disease. And that's one of the problems, guys, is a lot of the health issues that a person experiences with pesticide exposures are identical to either flu or maybe some of the other alcohol-related things. Doesn't really make any difference. It's usually when the person says that they work with pesticides or they work on a farm. Normally the doctors are kind of asking, well, are you working around pesticides? And then as soon as they say yes, then it's a natural assumption for the doctor to believe that, well, maybe your issue is pesticide related. So the doctor's required to fill out a report. It's called a doctor's first report. It goes to the health department. Health department's required to call us. This happens really fast, usually 24 hours. So we're getting the calls either anonymously, or the person tells us, or usually within 24 hours, somebody's gone to a doctor. At that point, we usually immediately go out and try to look for evidence, guys. I hate to say it that way, but I'll show up to a deal, and if there's field workers, I'll interview the field workers and ask them for their clothing. If I can't do the clothing, I may do leaf punch sampling or take some material off of the plant material. Like I say, there's really nothing that we can't sample anymore, whether it's a window or a clothing or dirt, or plants or water. Oh my gosh, stay away from the water, guys. So we do the sampling and we try to do it as quickly as possible because a lot of the products you guys are using break down and degrade quickly. So the sooner that we're able to do the sampling, the easier it is to detect the material. The sampling equipment, guys, nowadays is off the charts. If this guy has gotten sprayed with something, we're usually pretty able, we part per billion, guys. The sampling and the lab techniques that these guys have developed, they can detect this material very easy. Have I ever turned in a sample and it came back negative? No. I've turned in a lot of samples and then I pick up a lot of weird stuff that I didn't know was actually in the area. So basically that's kind of my presentation, guys. And doing the laws and regulations is always an interesting topic. If you guys have any questions at all, need any assistance at all,
I got a question.